Thank you very much to Seldi for this invitation and on behalf of our director, Genoveva Ruiz Calavera, who unfortunately could not be here today. I just wanted to convey the engineers' appreciation for this. It's a very timely discussion, and we increasingly believe that addressing informal economy is a top priority for the Western Balkans. I also would like to thank the very good policy brief that was produced as a basis of the discussion today, and I hope it can be really a tool to nourish this discussion. As you rightly point in the policy brief, the area of business environment and reduction of the hidden economy is critical for fulfilling the economic criteria and the Copenhagen criteria for eventual accession of the Western Balkan countries in the EU. So it does matter, and it matters also for multiple economic reasons. It has multiple implications from fiscal, and we are seeing now in the context of the COVID-19 the importance of the loss of revenues for the different countries, and how this has an impact on very basic essential services for the public. It's also a recurrent complaint by businesses in the region, who argue that unfair competition is a barrier for the competitiveness of their countries, and it also leads to job insecurity, issues related to safety at work. It favors the black economy, etc. So today, what I would like to perhaps just very briefly present is what we are trying to do about it. In the EU, with the Western Balkans, as you know, what we are trying to do is to bring this into the policy dialogue that we are having at two levels. One is on the in the contractual agreements that we have with the Western Balkans, in the stabilization and association agreements. We have regular sectorial discussions in the context of the subcommittees, where this is very much put forward in the discussion. But I think in the last few years, where we have also brought this to a higher level of prominence is in the context of the economic reform programs. So these are basically mirroring what the EU does with EU member states in the context of the European semester. So like EU member states have to submit an economic program to the Commission that then is assessed and leads to country-specific targeted recommendations. A similar, lighter version of this happens with the Western Balkans and Turkey. And this is the highest level of engagement that the EU has with the Western Balkans. It leads to a ministerial meeting where the ministers of the EU, of finance of the EU, meet with the ministers of finance of the region. And it again also joint policy guidance is agreed to have key reforms implemented. And the economic reform program is also, now that we are coming into this new financial framework, going to be even more strongly linked to the EU support, financial support, to IPA 3. So in the context of IPA 3, one of the key elements in the relevance check that we are going to be doing on the proposals that come from the country is to see to what extent do these correspond to the priorities that have been identified in the context of the economic reform programs, and do they promote, let's say, the implementation of those reforms. I'm coming now to the informal economy, where this is very much identified as a key challenge in most of the Western Balkans economies. And as a result, even though this year has been a particular year because of COVID, let's say the policy guidance that was adopted was a bit less linked to those key challenges which had been identified prior to the COVID pandemic, and therefore, we had to adapt, let's say, to the reality that was hitting so hard the world in May. But in spite of that, informality is reflected horizontally in the policy guidance of this year for all the Western Balkan countries. And there, the angle that was chosen was to try to stimulate the countries and suggest the provision of incentives for businesses and employees in the informal economy to register and to facilitate the transfer to the formal sector. Where we are now is we are undergoing, as we speak, usually we have in November, prior to the official submission of the economic reform programs, we have preliminary discussions with the countries. This week still, I was together with my colleagues from other DGs virtually in Kosovo. Last week, we were in North Macedonia. My colleagues were also in Montenegro and in Turkey. So, and next week we're going to be in Serbia and Bosnia. It has already taken place as well. In these policy discussions, again, informal economy is very prominently discussed. We've had discussions with the ministers of finance, and one maybe. I would just like to share some of the reflections that are coming out of these discussions. A starting point for tackling informal economy, we believe, is taking stock of what is the informal sector. And I think this measuring, let's say, the size and where the informal economy is very important. And this is a challenge for most Western Balkan countries. So we need to act better on looking at that, including the informal labor, which is I think the focus of your policy brief, but also more broadly about other aspects like the tax gap, etc., informal wages, etc. Second, informal economy is a multifaceted problem, and as a result, needs to be tackled in a comprehensive way with a full government approach to it. And what we have been seeing in some of the countries is that this is not the case yet, and that either they have, let's say, partial ways of looking and trying to address the informality, even though when the problem is acknowledged, the ways of trying to address it sometimes are patchy. And this calls for a comprehensive look at it, and not from the angle of a particular line ministry or a particular institution. There is also the need to have strong political will and to set clear targets in whatever the action plans that they are set up. These have to be focused on clear targets more than activities, and to monitor the implementation. Then some of the reforms that we would like to see in these action plans, I mean, are linked to also some of the issues that in a paper from the IMF in 2019, we're already highlighting there. No? And this calls for reducing the regulatory and administrative burden for businesses, promoting transparency and improving the government effectiveness, and improving tax compliance, promoting electronic payments, etc. But another of the reflection that is coming is that a top-down approach alone will not work. And the participation, I mean, a genuine attempt to reduce the informal sector requires the full participation and involvement of the society as a whole, and of particular business community, local governments, etc. And restrictive and control measures need to be accompanied by preventive and incentive measures to promote the formalization. And this again calls for acting in reforms on the regulatory environment and make it more business friendly, for instance. And finally, I would say that another of the elements that is coming is that, okay, COVID is bringing informality more, is highlighting the prominence of this and the importance to address it, because, well, countries and the ministers of finance are facing, there is less economic activity, businesses have difficulties in surviving, there is less fiscal revenues, and as a result, they have difficulties in financing essential public services. There is increased vulnerability of many sectors of the society. But on the other hand, COVID is also can be also an opportunity. And as I was mentioning, one of the policy guidelines that we had provided this year was try to provide incentives and for the formalization. And in a way, some of the fiscal packages that some of the countries in the region have adopted we are starting to see some positive signs in terms of formalization of workers. And because, well, some of them were, let's say, finding an incentive in order to access the benefits of those fiscal packages. And for instance, we were this week discussing with the Minister of Finance in Kosovo, who was mentioning that already since March, 14,000 new jobs had been created, registered, in spite of a decline in the economic activity, which suggests that there is a positive effect in the formalization. I leave it here. I look very much to the discussion today, and I think we should continue a dialogue in order to see how your suggestions as well in how the EU can better support the countries in the region to address this issue. Thank you very much.